Hi YouTube, I'm Matt and welcome to Geek Culture. I'm going to be talking about my favourite UK live action kids shows from my childhood. I'm going to start with a couple of dishonourable mentions. So what I mean by that is series which I watched but I didn't particularly like very much. The reason I watched them, even when I didn't really like them, was that back in my childhood there was like 4 channels, and at one point before Channel 4 arrived there was just the 3 channels. And at the time, after school, when I'd want to watch something, you'd have quite limited options. You'd immediately rule out BBC 2, so it was really whatever was on BBC One or ITV. Dishonourable mentions will probably include Rent-A-Ghost, and I'm sure some people out there will probably be screaming at your screen telling me how great Rent-A-Ghost was. And again, I probably enjoyed it at some point, but I still found it incredibly disturbing. Maybe it was the whole ghost thing. Maybe I was a bit young for that, or found it a bit weird. Jack and Ori. I don't know why, and it sounds bad, but I guess it bored me a little as a kid, unfortunately. Why don't you switch off your TV set and do something less boring instead? I guess every kid of my generation probably watched that show at some point. There was something about it that I just didn't quite like, and I could never quite put my finger on it. And funnily enough, a couple of years after I stopped watching Why Don't You, one of my friends, Nico, he was actually in one of the series of Why Don't You. He appeared as the main villain. I believe those series were set on a canal boat or something like that. I didn't watch it, I've just seen the odd clips here and there. But yeah, Why Don't You did irritate me. Wurzel Gummidge was, I guess, in many people's eyes a classic, but maybe I was just a bit too young. I think it came out 79 to 81, so I'd have been around 6, but I always found it just a bit freaky. In fact, the only bit that I really remember now, looking back, when Wurzel was up on like the cross that he'd be on, which way he'd fall. He'd always fall one way or the other, and we'd have to guess which way he was going to fall at the end of the episode. Supergran was another show that I sort of dipped in and out of a little bit. I've got a few vague memories of it, but there was something about it that kind of put me off a little bit, and I don't quite know what it was. The Goodies was something I know my brother really liked. I've got a few vague memories of it, but I don't think it really ever appealed to me particularly. Maybe I was just a bit too young, I think, at that time, which I guess also covers another sort of classic to many people, and probably to my brother as well, which is Tiswas. I think I was just too young when Tiswas was at its prime. I remember Chris Tarrant on it. The most memory I have of that show really is just his face, and some of the games did play, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure people were getting gunged all the time. I'm going to go on to my honourable mentions. These are series that I remember enjoying, but I just don't really remember enough of them to really talk in any great detail, or I guess the memory's sort of faded really, and I'm just left with this vague notion that I enjoyed these shows as a child. The first one being Finger Bobs, which was a show about finger puppets. I remember it being a little odd, but I certainly enjoyed it, and it was definitely one that I tuned in for. The next one was Let's Pretend. I know I really loved this show at the time. I just don't remember a lot about it. I seem to remember like a stage where they'd have boxes that they'd sort of drag over, covers, various props that they'd use to try and turn their stage into whatever they were pretending it was, and they'd act out little sketches and scenes, and it was just really a show about pretending and about imagination, and it clearly captured my imagination because it's definitely stuck in there as something that I really did resonate with at the time. The next series from 1983 was The Machine Gunners. I sort of roughly remember the story of this. I know there were sort of parts of the story that even scared me a little at the time, but again, I just don't remember enough about it to talk in any great detail. But I certainly, if I was to see a picture from it, I'd get a nice memory sort of flooding back, I'm sure. Stig of the Dump was another one that has kind of faded away a bit in my memory, but I know I really enjoyed it at the time. In fact, so much so that I remember writing my own story, Ethan Trugg, about a caveman, which was rather similar, in fact, to Stig of the Dump. But yeah, Stig of the Dump, definitely a classic. Johnny Briggs. I guess when I think back, The little bits I can remember of that series was that it was kind of a little bit dull, really, if I'm to think of it now. But I sort of enjoyed it at the time, but I just don't remember enough about it. But I know I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the theme tune to it as well. Another show I loved was On Safari with Christopher Biggins, which had amazing jungle sets with celebrities falling in big muddy ponds and fake rivers and swinging on vines, that kind of thing. Great fun. Another honourable mention would go to Crackerjack! I've got random memories of Stu Francis, the host, and his catchphrase, "Ooh, I could crush a grape."
Ooh, I could rip a tissue. July the 15th!
Wrong, Stu! Right, Wincy!
When I was researching this show, I came across the name of a show which sort of rung a bell, and I knew that I had watched the show, and I had a sort of a memory that I enjoyed it, and it was Chock-a-Block. It was on in 1981, so I'd have been 6, but for the life of me, I have no idea what it was about or who was in it or what it was. I just know that I liked Chock-a-Block. Another show that I enjoyed, but I just don't remember very much about, was the Basil Brush Show. Pretty much about the only thing I can remember about that show was Basil's catchphrase. Bomb, bomb! The next show I'm going to talk about is Take Heart, which took over from Vision On and starred the fabulously talented Tony Hart. And of course, his plasticine friend Morph. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Morph actually went on to get his own show in the end as well. And I guess probably the most memorable part of the show was the gallery, when all of the pieces of art sent in by the viewers would be displayed to a very memorable piece of music. Take Heart was replaced in 1983 by Heartbeat, and I guess a few years later it inspired Art Attack with Neil Buchanan. Yeah, this show really resonated with me back in the day because I loved art and I loved creating things and painting things. So it was definitely well up there as one of my favourites. The next show on my list aired from 79 until 92 and was originally hosted by Dave Lee Travis and was Kickstart, a motorcycle trials game. I guess this could have fallen into my honourable mentions because I guess I don't remember too much about it other than sort of motorbikes racing around very muddy tracks, zipping up and down slopes and through puddles. I probably went out on my bike many a time and pretended to be doing exactly what they were doing around some local scramble course in the area. But the other thing I remember the most about this series was probably the theme tune, which was just brilliant. It's a Knockout is the next show on my list. This show started in 1966 and was like a game show for kids with people in giant rubber suits going across bizarre obstacle courses, usually with lots of water being fired from water cannons. Yeah, it was a great series, and it was probably where shows like Takeshi's Castle originated from, and as with many shows on my list, had a memorable theme song as well. The Adventure Game, which was sort of set in space with all kinds of weird aliens, a talking plant, and it would end with an awesome vortex game. And I've got a memory of the celebrities, usually with Keith Chegwin being probably one of the prime suspects, waiting at a bus stop in space at the very end of the show. And I'm pretty sure for a while there, as I was growing up, way before the internet arrived, I thought I'd kind of dreamt of the Adventure Game because I couldn't find anything about it anywhere. The next series I'm going to talk about is T-Bag. And for anybody who's seen the awesome American series Prison Break, I don't mean this guy. T-Bag was about a witch called Tallulah Bag, or T-Bag, and her assistant, T-Shirt. It ran from 1985 until 1992 and had sort of various changes over the years, including when Tallulah Bag left and was replaced by her sister, Tabitha Bag. But T-Bag, I've got great memories of this series. Another series that I loved, yet I was probably a little young for, was Tripods. First series, which started in 1984, had 13 half-hour episodes and was based on a book, The White Mountains. And then the second series of 12 episodes was from another book, The City of Gold and Lead. I have memories of the tripods themselves and how terrifying they were, but yeah, I definitely loved Tripods, and it's certainly one I would like to revisit. So again, when I was researching the show, another name which popped up and again, I've not even thought of this show or remembered it for a very, very long time, was The Movie Game. It ran from 1988 to 1995, and it was almost like a movie-themed giant board game for the contestants on the show, with the host, John Barrowman, who would later be Captain Jack in Doctor Who. Yeah, I remember really loving it at the time because I was always really interested in movies and movie making. They'd have a little segment where the contestants would go behind the scenes and they would have to like act out a sequence or do a dance or take part in like a behind the scenes sort of activity. I'm going to watch some more episodes of this show just to remind myself of how much I really did enjoy it at the time. The next live action UK kids series that I'm going to talk about is, I guess, more of a personality than an actual series itself, because this personality appeared in various shows and started originally on TV AM, and it was of course Roland Rat.
Hello Matthew.
Yeah, he started on TV AM and literally boosted the viewing numbers like massively, and then was given his own show, Shed Vision. And between 1983 and 1985, Roland Rat got his own series during the kids' holidays.
Yeah.
Even introduced other characters into the mix like Errol the Hamster and Little Reggie. And I remember his car, his amazing Ratmobile. So many fond memories of Roland Rat. And of course, he wasn't just a TV presenter, of course. He was a music star as well. Roland Rat released several singles. The one I remember the most and the one I loved the most was definitely Rat Rapping. Whack-A-Day ran from 1985 to 1992 and was a spin-off series of Wide Awake Club, which was a Saturday morning show starring Timmy Mallet. I believe the story goes that they needed a new series each day of the kids' holidays from school. Roland Rat, who'd done the previous show, had moved to the BBC. It was like less than a week until the holidays were due to start. So they decided to do Whack-A-Day. Whack, of course, standing for Wide Awake Club. And they got Timmy Mallet to do it, as he had done with the Wide Awake Club on Saturdays. And they also had Michaela Strachan to come in and to help Timmy. But yeah, Timmy Mallet, such an amazing personality. Always the funky glasses every time, different ones usually in every episode. And I guess one of the things that I loved about Whack-A-Day during the holidays was that they'd show little 5-minute segments of cartoons. And that was where I was first introduced to the Transformers, and there were other series on there as well, like Batfink and even GoBots, which was like the opposition for the Transformers. Whack-A-Day had fun games on there, like the strangely named Bunk and Boob, and of course the most famous of all, Mallet's Mallet.
It's a word association game, mustn't pause, mustn't hesitate, bashing ahead like this, or like this. One of the most bruises loses, look at each other, go bleh! Look at them and go bleh! Look back and go bleh! Good.
But yeah, Timmy Mallet and Whack-A-Day was such a highlight of all the school holidays for me. The next series on my list started in 1981 and was Emu's World. It starred Rod Hull and his puppet, Emu, and of course Grotbags, the evil witch. Usually Grotbags would be trying to steal Emu and use her special powers to control the Pink Windmill kids, or brats as she called them. And of course, I guess the line that sticks in my mind the most was probably whenever the doorbell would ring, they'd all be singing,
There's somebody at the door!
Emu's World eventually morphed into the Pink Windmill Show. But yeah, really good fun series. I think most kids from that era probably remember Emu. The next series I'm going to talk about was Maid Marian and Her Merry Men. I love this show.
Fantastic, eh?
To me, it's like Blackadder for kids. It's got the same type of humour as Blackadder, but obviously aimed towards a younger audience. And of course, it had Tony Robinson. Baldrick was in there as well as the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he was absolutely brilliant in it. And in a twist on the classic Robin Hood tale, Maid Marian was the true boss of the party, and wimpy Robin Hood was her sidekick.
Are you mad?
One of the episodes I remember the most was a game called John, which of course was the game that ended up getting called Snooker. I remember some of the songs like The Whitish Knight, fantastic show, and of course it had an absolutely awesome theme song and TV intro, brilliant.
Marvellous. Absolutely mega fab.
Now from 1984 until 1986 was Robin of Sherwood. and a very famous British actor, Ray Winstone, played Will Scarlet in the series, and whenever I see Ray Winstone in anything, I immediately think of Will Scarlet from Robin of Sherwood. I wasn't as fussed about the later series as they changed the actor who played Robin. Definitely up there for me as the definitive telling of the Robin Hood story. When I was a kid, I loved football. I don't particularly like football anymore. I certainly don't watch it or follow football. The most football I get is kicking a ball around with my little boy. But yeah, back in the day, I loved football, and I absolutely loved the series Joss's Giants. The series ran from 86 to 87. Brilliant theme tune. Just a really good, fun series. So many great characters in the team and all the teammates, and Jossie himself, of course. But yeah, I absolutely loved Joss's Giants. And every time I even say the word, the theme song is rattling through my brain.
Justice Giants!
Now, a series which I absolutely loved and I tuned in every single time it was on the TV was Nightmare. This was a show that was sort of ahead of its time, really, and used sort of computer graphics to generate some, at the time, awesome looking scenes. I guess the show was probably inspired by the popularity of the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, and as in Dungeons and Dragons, where you have a dungeon master, Nightmare had its own dungeon master, which was Treguard, who I believe was a Saxon knight, and he would help to guide the dungeoneers through the dungeon to try and reach their goal. Every kid probably wanted to be on that show and probably wanted to be the one with the helmet of justice on, being guided by their friends. But Nightmare, fantastic show. Now, before I move on to my top 3 shows, I'm going to give a special mention. Now, this show isn't what I would class as a kid's show, so I'm not technically going to include it on my list, but I am going to give it a mention, and it is, of course, Doctor Who. I've been a massive Doctor Who fan since, I think, my brother started watching the Jon Pertwee era, but I got into it more when Tom Baker took over. I can remember hiding behind the sofa in fear when the Daleks or the Cybermen would arrive on the screen. But yeah, I'm not going to go into any detail about Doctor Who. I just wanted to give it a mention because obviously it is a live action series, but I don't necessarily class it as a kids show, but it's definitely one of my favourite shows from back in the day. The next show was created by Phil Redmond and was Grange Hill. It was basically a drama series for kids about a school, and over the years it really did sort of teach us kids a lot about life, usually through the hardship of some of the main characters like Zammo, who ended up being a drug addict. And for that particular storyline, they even released a song, Just Say No, to teach kids about the ills of drugs. But as well as drug addiction, the show covered other things like bullying and sort of relationships between pupils and the teachers. So many classic characters in Grange Hill. I've already mentioned Zammo. There was the headmistress, Mrs. McCluskey, the strict teacher, Mr. Bronson, and the students, of course. There was Tucker Jenkins, Roland, Robbie Wright, Benny Green. So many classic characters over the years in Grange Hill. And of course it had an awesome intro music and intro sequence, which was like a sort of cartoon style, with of course that sausage getting thrust in on a fork. Always sticks in my mind, that one. But Grange Hill, absolutely loved it. The Sooty Show, starring, of course, in my era anyway, Matthew Corbett, who took over from his dad Harry, and Sooty, Sweep and Sue, whose adventures with Matthew would always have me in hysterics, and it'd always been some ridiculously funny practical jokes and slapstick humour. I loved Sooty and Sweep and Sue when I was a kid. At some point, I've no idea when or even why, I ended up buying the puppets, and when my son was born, I'd sort of entertain him by putting on my own Sooty, Sweep and Sue shows. He didn't really understand much of what I was saying, but my wife in the other room would be giggling her head off with some of the usually largely inappropriate things that the puppets would be saying. But yeah, as you'll have seen on my channel, I've done a few bits with Sooty and Sweep over the years. Still a classic show, and I was lucky enough to have actually met Sooty himself on the pier at Blackpool. I went with my son and my wife, and we went and watched the Sooty show live on stage. And afterwards we got to meet him. And the number one show on my list simply has to be Rainbow. Rainbow centred around the adventures of Geoffrey with his puppet friends, Zippy, who was a sort of mustard coloured I've no idea what, who had a zip on his mouth that could be zipped when he was talking a bit too much, which he did quite often. There was another puppet of George, who was kind of a pink hippo. By the way, if anybody does know what a zippy actually was, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to find out. And then in a giant bear suit, there was Bungle, and the four of them would have the usual sort of kiddie adventures, trying to teach us about something or other, whether it's sharing.
Zippy, you know you've got to share the bricks, don't you?
Whatever it was, that the lesson of the day, which would probably usually get outlined at the end by Jeffrey. And of course, they'd always have their three friends come in to join them at some point, usually for a musical number, and that would be Rod, Jane and Freddie. And of course, Rainbow had an amazing theme tune as well. Obviously, I didn't watch Rainbow for a very, very long time, but when my son started watching it and he got into Rainbow, the Rainbow Gang became a massive part of my life. Because my son, even until very recently, my son would ask me to do the voices of Jeffrey and Zippy and George, and occasionally Bungle, because I didn't do a very good Bungle. So the other three voices came a lot easier for me. And Zippy and Jeffrey would have full conversations with my son about the things they'd done or the things my son had done. So Rainbow's pretty much overtaken my life in the last sort of 6 years. If there's one thing as an adult I can appreciate, it's the Rainbow special, which was never aired, and I believe it was filmed specifically for a Christmas party or something like that. They filmed the infamous Twanger episode, which if you've never seen it, please go on YouTube and type Rainbow Twanger episode and give yourself a really good laugh.
It doesn't matter what size your twanger is.
I've got a big red one.
Well, have you got your twangers out? And remember, you can bounce your balls at the same time if you like.
Rainbow, definitely my all-time favourite live-action kids show from my childhood. And that is the end of my list of my favourite live-action kids shows from my childhood. I'd love to hear in the comments below which live-action kids shows you enjoyed, if there was any on my list that you also enjoyed, or if there was some that I'd missed off my list. And I'm sure somebody will probably mention one which should have been on my list, but I just forgot all about it. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, and I'll see you next time.